and it's about a little boy by the name of Roll Hatchell. Roll Hatchell was about 9 years old, and he liked school, and he liked athletics, but the best thing he liked was to go fishing. And it was towards the end of the school year, and his birthday was coming up. And when they finally had his birthday, his mommy and daddy surprised him with a brand new casting rod and reel. He'd never had one that was really his own. The one he always used was his daddy's, and it was kind of old, and it was kind of worn, and it was kind of a little bit rusty. But he had a brand new one now, a new reel and a new rod. He was so proud, and he remembered his daddy told him. His daddy said, when school's out, the whole family is going to go up to the lakes for 2 or 3 days, and we've got a cabin rented, and we could all stay at the cabin, and we could play outside, we could eat up there, we could go fishing and swimming and boating and really have a good time. Well, finally school was over, and Roll and his little brother and little sister were real excited about going to the cabin. And finally the weekend came that they were all supposed to go, and they all packed up all their stuff. Roll and his bait and tackle box, and his new rod and his new reel, and his sister had her baby doll and her crib and everything, and his little brother had his cars and his trucks and things. And so they all went up to the cabin that day, up north of where they lived, about 100 miles. And it was a real nice lake, and there's no other cabins on the lake. It was a good-sized lake, too. But just Roll's cabin was the only one there. And as soon as they got there, everybody rushed to the cabin, and Roll rushed to the back of the car, and got his tackle box and his reel and his fishing rod out. And he said, Dad, can I go down and check out and see how my rod and reel work? And Dad said, okay, but be careful. And he said, do not go in the boat. You know that because you don't have your life preserver, and there's nobody with you. So you have to stay on the bank. And Roll said, okay, Dad, I will. And so Roll went down, and it was a beautiful day, and the clouds were floating by, and there was a nice little breeze. And he went down near a big tree near the side of the lake, and he put his tackle box there, and he went down to the edge of the water, and he cast out his new plugs on his new rod and reel. And oh, it worked so well. It just was so smooth. He could cast real far, and it was doing real well. But no bites. The fish were not biting that day, so he thought, well, I'll just stick it in this crawdad hole, my rod, and leave it here right by the water, and I'll just go back up here a few feet and sit by the tree and just watch the rod from there. And so he went up and he sat down by the tree, and he was just sitting looking up in the air, looking at the clouds floating by. There was all kinds of things he imagined he could see in the clouds, like elephants and things like that, but they were really just clouds that are making funny formations. And he was so relaxing, he just relaxed real well, and all of a sudden, out in the middle of the lake, this huge fish jumped up. And it got a little bit closer, and a little bit closer, and it kept jumping out of the water like it was catching flies or something in the water. It kept jumping out. It was the biggest fish he's ever seen. In fact, it looked like a largemouth. Yes, it is a largemouth bass. It was a huge one. It had to be 3 feet long. He's never seen one so large. So he jumps up and he runs down and he grabs his rod and reel and he casts out towards it. But the reel and the plug would not quite go that far, just not quite far enough. And he cast out again, and it wouldn't go far enough. And he thought, oh, if I could catch that, everybody would be so proud of me. They would be really proud of me. Oh, if I could catch it. And he kept throwing the plug out as far as he could, but it would not go far enough. And the fish kept jumping out there, and he thought, oh, I hope it doesn't go. And then he looked over to the dock, and there was a boat. And he thought, if I can get in that boat and go out just a little bit further, I could catch that. And boy, would my mommy and daddy and the kids be really proud of me. He said, no, he said, Dad told me not to go in the boat. He thought, well, I'll do it real quickly and they won't know. So he got his rod and reel and he gets in the boat and he rows out a little further and he cast it out. And he felt something hit the plug, but it didn't catch it. And he reeled it back in and he cast out again and nothing happened. And the third time, he cast it out real far, and this time, bang! Boy, did it catch it. It was something big. It really got a hold of it. Oh, he said, I've got the big fish. I've got the big fish. I'm going to take it up and show it to my folks. And he started to reel it in. But he realized that fish was so strong and so big that it started pulling the boat. And he thought, oh, I can't even turn the crank on my reel. He said, it's so strong. And he set the hook, and he made sure that it wouldn't get away. And the pole bent way over, and it kept pulling, and he kept going out further and further, and he looked up in the air. And the clouds were getting darker and darker. And it looked like a storm was coming his way, and the fish was pulling him out further and further into the lake, and he looked behind him, and the cabin was getting smaller and smaller because he was going further and further away, and he didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden he could see the lightning and the oh, this is awful. The lightning, more thunder is coming, and the fish was pulling him further and further and further, and the lightning kept cracking and kept going. And what can I do? I wish I'd stop. I can't even hardly hold on to the pole. I don't want to lose my brand new pole and reel. What will Mom and Dad say if I did that? Well, he said, I can't stop the boat. It just keeps going out further and further. And the lightning got worse and worse. And the storm even got worse. And it was coming in closer. And he didn't know what to do. Oh, he was almost ready to cry. And he kept saying, stop, please stop, please stop, please stop. And all of a sudden, something grabbed him. And he looked up. And there was his daddy. And his daddy said, son, wake up. He said, you must have gone to sleep. You've been having a dream. You kept saying, stop, stop. And the little boy said, Roll said, gosh, Dad, I must have been having a dream. He said, boy, that was a real scary dream. And his dad said, well, come on up. He said, it's going to rain. He said, I see some dark clouds coming this way over the lake. And he said, so get your tackle box and bring your things up. And so Roll grabbed his tackle box and he headed up to the cabin, and his dad said, Roll, haven't you forgot something? He said, oh, yes, yes. He said, I forgot my new rod and reel. So he ran down, and there it was, stuck in the crawdad hole where he'd put it, and he picked it up, and he started reeling in the plug that he had floating out there in the lake. And oh, by Jove, it must have been stuck on a limb or something, because he couldn't pull it in hardly, and it was getting harder and harder and harder, and all of a sudden he felt it tug once, he felt it tug a couple times, and 2 or 3 times, and out jumps from the water a very large bass. No, it wasn't that big, huge bass he saw in his dream, but it was a big, big bass, and he reeled it in, and he got it up to the shore, and he picked it up, and it was beautiful bass. It was a nice bass. And he yells, Dad, Dad, guess what? And he grabs the bass and his rod and his reel and his tackle box, and he runs up to the house, and he said, look what I caught. And his dad said, wow, that's a winner. He said, let's weigh it. And they weighed it, and it weighed 5 pounds, 14 ounces, almost 6 pounds. It was a huge bass. And Roll was so proud of it. It was the biggest bass he'd ever caught. In fact, his daddy had said, you know what, son, that's bigger than any bass I've ever caught. And so that night, they had a big bass dinner, and it was because of Roll catching the big one. And he was so proud, and he was so happy that it was a dream, and that he really didn't go out in the boat like his mommy and daddy told him not to do, and that it was all a dream, and he did catch the big one. And that's the end of the story.